You have probably heard the statistic. Ancient humans lived to around 35. Maybe you pictured your ancestors as old at 25, gray at 30, gone before they ever got to see their grandchildren. You imagined a world of perpetual youth cut brutally short. That picture is almost entirely wrong. And the real answer to why ancient humans died young is far stranger, far more complicated, and far more revealing about the world you live in today than any simple number could suggest. Let's start with the number itself. Where did 35 come from? Archaeologists and anthropologists who study ancient skeletal remains calculate something called average life expectancy at birth. They look at all the people who ever lived in a given population, everyone who died as infants, everyone who died in childhood, everyone who survived to old age, and they average it all out. When you do that for most prehistoric populations, you get a number somewhere between 25 and 40. But that average is doing something quietly devastating to the truth. It is including every infant who died in the first days of life, every child who didn't survive their first winter, every toddler lost to infection before their immune system had time to develop. In some ancient populations, as many as 1 in 2 children died before reaching the age of 5. When you include all of those deaths in your average, the number collapses. It looks like nobody lived very long, but that isn't what was happening at all. If an ancient human survived childhood, if they made it past those brutal first years, their odds changed dramatically. A hunter-gatherer who reached the age of 15 could reasonably expect to live into their 50s or even their 60s. Some live longer. The fossil and ethnographic record is full of older individuals. There were grandparents in the Paleolithic. There were elders. There were people who carried decades of accumulated knowledge about where water could be found, which plants were safe, which seasons brought danger. Those people were not anomalies. They were essential. Anthropologist Rachel Caspary spent years studying ancient teeth and bones to determine the ratio of older to younger adults in prehistoric populations. What she found was striking. Across millions of years of human evolution, the proportion of people surviving to older age was relatively low until a sudden, dramatic shift happened roughly 30,000 years ago. Older adults began surviving in far greater numbers. And Caspary argues that this explosion of grandparents may have been one of the key triggers for the cultural revolution of the Upper Paleolithic, the sudden burst of art, tool innovation, and symbolic thinking that defines modern human behavior. Grandparents, it turns out, were not a luxury. They were technology. So the first thing ancient humans died from was not old age at 35. It was infancy. It was childhood. It was the gauntlet of the first years of life that modern medicine has made nearly invisible to you. Now, think about what that gauntlet actually looked like. Your ancestors were born without hospitals, without sterile environments, without antibiotics, without any way to stop an infection once it began. A cut could kill you. A scratch that got dirty could become a death sentence within days. A child born in winter faced exposure. A mother giving birth faced risks that modern obstetrics has reduced to a fraction of what they once were. Childbirth itself was one of the leading causes of death for women across virtually all of human prehistory. Not because ancient people were fragile or foolish, because the process of human birth is extraordinarily difficult, made more so by the fact that human skulls evolved to be large faster than human hips evolved to accommodate them. Paleoanthropologist Timothy Taylor has described this as an obstetric dilemma, the tension between the expanding human brain and the mechanical constraints of bipedal birth. The result was a process that, without skilled assistance, carried significant risk for both mother and child. And even with the most skilled midwives a prehistoric community could produce, the tools available were not the tools of a modern delivery room. Infectious disease was the other great killer, not the organized plagues that swept through cities in later history, but the quieter, constant pressure of bacterial infections, parasites, and injuries that couldn't be properly treated. Your immune system is remarkable. It evolved over millions of years to fight an enormous range of pathogens. But it has limits. And in a world without antibiotics, a streptococcal infection in the throat could travel to the heart. A wound that became septic could kill within a week. A child with a high fever had no medication to bring it down. Here is something that might surprise you. Ancient hunter-gatherers were not, as a rule, sicker than modern people in the ways you might expect. They were not constantly battling illness. They lived in small, mobile groups that rarely stayed in one place long enough to contaminate their water supply or build up dangerous concentrations of disease. They ate a varied diet that modern nutritional science increasingly recognizes as remarkably balanced. They moved constantly. Their bodies were lean and strong. Chronic diseases, the kind that kill most people in wealthy countries today, the heart disease, the type 2 diabetes, the certain cancers, were largely absent. Evolutionary biologist Randolph Ness, who studies the evolution of disease, has pointed out that many of the conditions that now kill people in middle and old age are what he calls diseases of modernity, conditions that arise in bodies that evolved for one environment but now live in a completely different one. Your cardiovascular system was not designed for a diet of processed sugar and saturated fat and a life spent sitting. Your blood sugar regulation was not designed for the constant availability of refined carbohydrates. Ancient humans didn't die of heart attacks at 55 in significant numbers. But this is not because they didn't live to 55. It is because their environment did not produce the same chronic pressures on the body that yours does. What ancient humans died from was acute, sudden, violent sometimes, an infected wound, a broken bone that couldn't heal properly, a difficult childbirth, a drought that lasted one season too long, a predator, a fall, appendicitis, still a leading cause of death in places without surgical care today, would have been fatal every time. A ruptured spleen, a burst blood vessel in the brain. Conditions that modern emergency medicine now routinely survives were death sentences in a world without hospitals. And then there was violence. The evidence on this is genuinely complicated and has been debated extensively among anthropologists. Some early researchers, looking at skeletal remains with healed fractures and blunt force trauma, concluded that prehistoric life was extraordinarily violent, a war of all against all in which murder was common. Others, studying living hunter-gatherer populations, found considerably less evidence of organized violence and argued that prehistoric people were more peaceful than the myth of the savage past suggested. The truth, as best as current evidence can reconstruct it, is somewhere in between. Interpersonal violence existed. Raids between groups occurred, but the scale and frequency varied enormously by region, period, and social structure. Violence was a cause of death. It was not, for most people and most times, the dominant one. What you're left with, when you strip away the myth of the 35-year lifespan, is something more nuanced and more sobering. Ancient humans did not live short lives because their bodies were weak or because evolution had failed them. They lived shorter lives on average because the first years of life were extraordinarily dangerous, because injuries and infections that are now treatable were fatal, and because the social and medical infrastructure that now extends and protects life simply did not exist. The deep irony is this. The human body you're living in right now was built for a world that no longer exists. Your immune system, your healing capacity, your metabolic machinery, your pain response, your stress response, all of it was calibrated by millions of years of evolution in environments where the threats were acute and the chronic pressures were minimal. The body that struggled to survive infancy in a prehistoric camp is the same body that now has to navigate a world of antibiotic resistance, sedentary office work, ultra-processed food, and ambient stress that never fully resolves. In some ways, you are the beneficiary of everything your ancestors couldn't have. In other ways, you are running ancient hardware in a world it was never designed to handle. Demographer James Valpel, who spent his career studying human longevity, observed that life expectancy at birth has roughly doubled over the past 2 centuries in industrialized nations. Not because the human body changed, because the environment around it did. Sanitation, vaccines, antibiotics, surgical care, clean water. These are the technologies that did what millions of years of evolution could not. They made the first years of life safe enough that the body's own capacity for longevity could finally express itself. Your ancient ancestor, if they survived childhood, had a body capable of living for decades. Many of them did. The grandparents were always there in the background of the story, carrying the knowledge, teaching the skills, holding the memory of the group. What changed is not how long humans can live. What changed is how many of us get the chance to find out. You have that chance. Your ancestors, more often than not, did not. And the next time someone tells you that humans were only meant to live to 35, you will know what that number actually means. It means childhood was lethal. It means infection was fatal. It means the world had not yet built the systems that now keep you alive. It does not mean your ancestors were destined to be old at 30 and gone before they ever got to see who their children would become. Many of them saw exactly that. They just had to survive long enough to get there. And the body they used to do it, ancient, adaptive, built for a world that no longer exists, is the same body you are living in right now.